This series is created by the California Department of Social Services in partnership with the California Alliance of Caregivers. I am Summer Rolfe. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. I'm an analyst with the Foster Caregiver Policy and Support Unit at CDSS, and I will be your facilitator today for the webinar, LGBTQ+ Youth Suicide Awareness and Prevention Strategies for Caregivers. The LGBTQ+ stands for lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, plus, and we will definitely go into a lot more detail. Slide, please. Before we get started, though, I'd like to go over some logistics. So this webinar is being recorded, and it will be available later at www.caregivers.org/webinars. All of the handouts, the slides, and this recording will be emailed to all attendees. And if you would like a certificate of attendance, please email your request to the email address listed below. And Jen, could you please put that in the chat as well for everyone? Please do not send requests for your certificate during the webinar because they may be misplaced or not seen. If you can wait until the end, that would be very helpful. And as attendees, you will not have the ability to speak or to be on camera. So please submit all of your questions to the Q&A section down in the toolbar. If you see an icon with 3 dots and you hover over this, you should be able to open it and see the chat as an option. The Q&A as an option. And thank you for putting your names and your counties in the chat. Slide. So we have an exciting agenda today. Jennifer Rexroad is going to begin by sharing the caregiver perspective. She is the executive director of the California Alliance of Caregivers. After that, Alex Gomez will present the suicide rates of LGBTQ+ youth in foster care, and he is an advocacy and government affairs coordinator for the Trevor Project. Following Alex, we have Vida Kavar, and she will be presenting LGBTQ+ suicide awareness and prevention strategies for caregivers. And she is here from Get Real, California, Family Builders. After our speakers, we're going to follow with a Q&A, and this is going to be monitored and presented by Linnea Blackwell, who is a policy assistant for the California Alliance of Caregivers, and Alicia Ward, who is an analyst with the Foster Care Rates Policy Unit at CDSS. Slide. And with that, I would like to hand it over to Jennifer Rexroad.
Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. We're very excited to bring all of you resources on this very important topic. As caregivers of foster and/or probation youth, it is really important that that caregivers are aware of some of the basics on being a supportive and friendly home, safe, friendly, supportive home for LGBTQ youth. Many of whom may not have come out yet, or workers, placing agencies may not know where they are in their journey. So we generally want to make sure that our homes communicate that all youth are safe and will be supported. And in addition, we know that, and our speakers are going to share some of the alarming statistics, but we know that youth in care are often more at risk for suicide and for trauma and mental health issues. So we want to be sure that that as caregivers, we're informed on how we can be aware of signs and how we can connect our youth to resources. We recently had a panel of parents caring for LGBTQ youth, and the two most important messages that we walked away with was one, to think about ways that we can make our homes feel friendly and safe to all youth, and also that caregivers attend some kind of support group for parents of LGBTQ youth so that they can ask questions and get resources from other parents rather than putting the burden of training on the youth and their care. And so hopefully this training will bring all of you a lot of resources or connect you with people or agencies that can answer your questions. And with that, I will turn it over to Alex Gomez from the Trevor Project. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon.
I'm so happy to be here, everybody. Thank you so much for inviting me. My name is Alex Gomez. I use he, him pronouns, and I'm going to be talking about suicide prevention with LGBTQ youth with the history of foster care. Thank you. I am the Advocacy and Government Affairs Coordinator. Like I said, I use he, him pronouns. In this position, I oversee a variety of different programs to include ending the awful practice of conversion therapy and also ensuring that we are providing or we are having quality sexual orientation and gender identity data in national data sets. So there's some other stuff that I do on top of also suicide prevention in various spaces. Slide. So who we are, the Trevor Project is the world's largest suicide prevention and crisis intervention organization for LGBTQ young people. Slide. Our goal is our mission is to end suicide among LGBT young people. LGBTQ folks face many challenges in today's society, and unfortunately, suicide is a major public health crisis for LGBTQ youth. Slide. So in response to that, these are our crisis intervention services. You will notice that all of our direct crisis services, chat, text, and lifeline are all 24/7. And we are proud to be able to reach young people where they are at wherever they need us. So now that would be really actually a good time to make sure you take out your phones and have your, and record this information right here, because if you may not need it, you're never going to know when somebody else you may know might need this information. So it's always just good to have it with you. Slide. We are also excited to tell you a bit about our prevention-focused programs, Trevor Space, Trevor Education, Trevor Advocacy, which I am part of, and Trevor Research. Trevor Space is the world's largest safe space social networking community for LGBTQ youth, their families, and allies. This is a fantastic space for LGBTQ youth to gather in a very safe and monitored space. So that way, and when I say safe and monitored, I mean, I believe it is 24 and younger, but do not quote me on that. And it is monitored by Trevor staff to make sure that everybody is empowering themselves to be the best that they can be. So through Trevor Research, our programmatic evaluations ensure that we significantly reduce suicidality with our services. And we also publish external research to help peers support LGBTQ youth, peers very much like yourselves. And I'd love to plug in our research and our resources at the end of this presentation, so you all can be equipped with fantastic resources that we are able to provide. And then, of course, our Trevor Advocacy works at the federal, state, and local levels, includes publicly advocating for against particular bills, and finally joint advocacy briefs and major cases. And last but not least is Trevor Education. Our online education programs include information about school policies and training programs for teachers and guidance counselors. And if anybody is interested in taking a training with the Trevor Project, please feel free to email me. I'll put my email in the chat and we can get you connected with our education department. Slide. So why we exist. Unfortunately, the Trevor Project estimates that more than 1.8 million LGBTQ youth between the ages of 13 and 24 in the US seriously consider suicide each year and could benefit from our services. Now more than ever, our youth need support. Slide. So we exist because unfortunately suicide is the second leading cause of death for young people, according to the CDC. According to Trevor's annual survey on LGBTQ mental health, LGBTQ youth are 4 times more likely to attempt suicide. We exist because we know that up to 50% of all trans people and non-binary people have made a suicide attempt, many before the age of 25. We also acknowledge that living in today's world is stressful and that LGBTQ youth folks are heavily impacted by what is going on in our world, and there is a lot that is going on in our world today. For example, Trevor's call volumes doubled the day after 2016 election, particularly important in light of COVID-19. And overall, 4.1% of LGBTQ youth ages 13 to 24 have reported ever being in foster care, compared to 2.6 among the general population of US adults 18 and older. Therefore, very much signifying that there is a lot more LGBTQ youth in foster care proportionate to the individuals who are not LGBTQ youth. I believe I saw another statistic from the Family Equality Council. 1 in 3 foster care youth identify as LGBTQ plus. Slide. So LGBTQ youth who have reported being in foster care had 3 times greater odds of reporting a past year's suicide attempt compared to those who had not. You can see that right here reflected in the graph. This is pulled from our most recent research brief titled Youth with a History of Foster Care. And we can definitely send you out, I can definitely put those resources in the chat box or have somebody send them out soon. When taking a closer look at this data, our research team has found that transgender and non-binary youth had a greater odds of being in foster care compared to cisgender LGBTQ youth, and that the greatest odds were experienced by transgender girls and women, followed by non-binary youth, and then transgender boys and men. LGBTQ youth of color also had significantly greater odds of being in foster care compared to white and LGBTQ youth. White LGBTQ youth. You can, I believe, see that reflected in the graph as well. Native and Indigenous LGBTQ youth had the greatest odds of experiencing the highest rates of foster care, followed by multiracial youth, Black LGBTQ youth, Latinx LGBTQ youth, and then Asian and Pacific Islander LGBTQ youth. We are able to have this fantastic breakdown in demographics, although it is really heartbreaking to hear the vast statistics of individuals who have thought or seriously considered suicide. But we are able to use this fantastic demographic data due to our fantastic research team at the Trevor Project, which I have recently mentioned, led by Dr. Amy Green, a fantastic VP of our research, who made it a point to say that we wanted a diverse sample in our most recent national survey. And because we were able to market and be able to reach out to a diverse set of youth, we were able to come up with these fantastic numbers to further empower us to advocate for more intersectional mental health policies that are more sustainable and long lasting and actually address the mental health issues of the most marginalized of us. Next slide, please. Pardon me, I'm going to take a quick sip of water. Fantastic, thank you so much. So our data also points to a strong association between foster care involvement and being kicked out, abandoned, or running away due to treatment based on one's LGBTQ identity, which is reflected here in the graph. Particularly among transgender and non-binary youth. Our data isn't able to establish, however, whether youth were kicked out, abandoned, or ran away prior to, during, or being in foster care. However, the association between the two experiences, I think, really highlights the important role supportive and accepting caregivers can play in helping LGBTQ youth remain outside the foster care system. So when looking at this graph right here, we can't tell if LGBTQ youth ran away, were abandoned, or were kicked out at one point in their life and in relation to where the foster care also started and where it had ended. But we did realize that those with the accepting, or those who we considered with accepting caregivers, ended up staying in one place longer, or ended up being outside of the foster care system longer, compared to those who maybe had a more negative experience with caregivers. Again, highlighting the association of positive affirmation, support, and understanding. Next slide, please. Our data highlights the power of LGBTQ affirming schools for all youth, but particularly for those who have a history of foster care. The data alludes to the power of positive factors like affirmation and social support to buffer the impact of other negative experiences amongst LGBTQ youth with a history of foster care. So we know that LGBTQ affirming schools were protective for LGBTQ youth in general. And I think I can actually speak to that myself, being in high school, maybe about 10 years or so, being out of actually a very progressive affirming high school made it very easy for me to come out and for me to express myself and, you know what I mean, be able to be the queer man that I am today. And we know that they have an even greater protective effects for LGBTQ youth with the history of foster care compared to those who were never in foster care. So what we can take from that right there is, even though LGBTQ youth in foster care are experiencing higher rates of suicide ideation, we know that things like affirming schools and advocating for affirming policies in schools vastly reduces the amounts of those ideations and vastly reduces the rates of suicidality within this demographic of LGBTQ youth, those who are experiencing foster care youth. So affirming schools, affirming caregivers, we can see a nice pattern going on right here. I think I also want to mention that among LGBTQ youth with the history of foster care, those who reported attending LGBTQ affirming schools had more than 50% lower odds of reporting a past year suicide attempt compared to those who attended a school that was not LGBTQ affirming. So again, another fantastic data point that I would love for you to run with and take to your nearest school board to talk about the importance of having an affirming school and having affirming policies at your school, so that way we can see lower rates of suicide attempts among this demographic and group. Next slide, please. So what can you do? Well, first of all, I think if you are here, then you are doing the first step and what I think is the most important step, and that is to educate, educate, and educate yourself. The Trevor Project and a bunch of other organizations have a fantastic amount of resources. You can see right here in the bottom left corner, we have a nice little short link, trvr.org/resources. If you want to write that down or take a little screenshot if you're viewing this on a mobile device. But we have a variety of resources to help LGBTQ youth navigate their identities and to help people become allies to those individuals. The first step in becoming an ally, if you yourself are not LGBTQ, but you care about LGBTQ people like a human being, the first step in becoming an ally to LGBTQ youth, especially those in and with a history of foster care, is, like I said, to educate yourself. To find our resources and publications, such as our Guide to Being an Ally to Transgender and Non-Binary Youth, or our How to Support Bisexual Youth, you can visit the link below. I can also say that there is fantastic discourse on here on how to deal with intersectional mental health issues, such as Black LGBTQ youth and Native American LGBTQ youth, Latinx LGBTQ youth, and then our research department has also published fantastic studies on how to approach intersectionality in mental health policy and mental health practices. Next. So these important documents highlight the need to show affirmation and support through purposeful action. So for example, in our publication, How to Support Bisexual Youth, we talk about the importance of celebrating bisexuality and bi youth to combat the harmful effects of biphobia and bi erasure. Now we're going to get into a little bit of a small lesson right here. So if you want to take some notes, feel free. Biphobia is defined as the fear, intolerance, or hatred of people who experience attraction to people of more than one gender. Biphobia can really compromise the mental health and safety of bi young people. For bi youth who live at the intersection of other marginalized identities, such as being Black and bisexual, being Latinx and bisexual, being a person of color, a woman of color, being any other type of marginalized identity, the impacts of biphobia are amplified and compounded. Now, bisexual erasure, or bi-erasure for short, for a little bit shorthand, is an element of biphobia in which the existence and legitimacy of bisexuality are questioned or denied outright. So I know that was a little bit academic and a little forensic right there, but what I think is the best way to put this is bisexual people want to feel validated, and bisexual people want to feel affirmed, and that their sexual attractions or romantic attractions are valid and real parts and real validation, or real parts on the human spectrum that everybody and other people experience as well. So one of the many ways to support bisexual youth is to actively challenge these biphobic assumptions in our everyday lives. And that can be the first step in very much every other type of learning to be more gender expansive, pardon me, and sexual orientation expansive. Biphobia can be found in both straight and queer communities, so it's important to address it no matter where it originates. And then here are some tips on how to support Bi youth coming from our resource, and I'd be more than happy to share this resource with you if you want to delve deeper. If you assume that a person is gay or straight based on their current relationship, work to reframe your understanding that the people in that relationship could be of any gender or sexual orientation. So for instance, if you're walking down the mall and you see two individuals who appear really masculine, and in your mind you say, look at these two gay men, I would like you to stop and reframe that and say, first of all, I am making the assumption that these are people who identify as male. They could be non-binary, they could be female. We do not know. We cannot assume someone's gender. Same thing with somebody's sexual orientation. We may look at somebody and see them with one gender, but they may be attracted to a variety of genders, which I believe is the beauty of our human experience. So trying to challenge those assumptions and have a little fun with, make a little story for yourself about what's going on and challenge those assumptions. I think it's a great exercise and a really positive way to reframe your idea of what bisexuality can look like. And take people for their word if they share that they have a multi-sexual identity with you. If somebody shares that they are bisexual, affirm it and move on. It is an aspect of their sexuality, and until otherwise, they will let you know if that changes probably. If you see or hear an example of biphobia or bi-erasure, address it by sharing that bisexuality is real and valid, as well as resources to learn more about bi identities, i.e. the Trevor Project's resource page. Next slide, please. Another resource I think we can really quickly talk about, and I'm recognizing I'm probably getting short on time now. Another resource that we can talk about is how to be an ally to transgender LGBTQ youth. And I think one of the most uncomfortable instances in trying to be a transgender ally is maybe when we make a mistake and misgender or misgender somebody, or even maybe use their dead name. So here are a couple of tips and tricks to implement for when you eventually, and you probably will find yourself in that situation, but as an ally, you know that it is not correct and that you want to listen, be accountable for your actions, and then you can commit to do better. So let me tell you how that can happen. So if we listen under the subsection of listen, unfortunately, it's really, really common to avoid listening to those we've heard, whether intentional or not. It inspires a lot of uncomfortable feelings of guilt and shame because we really don't want to take on that ownership, but because we want to be an ally to gender non-conforming people, we need to take on that ownership. So we need to stay in our discomfort and be willing to listen because this is how we can grow. We got to feel it just a little bit. And we need to seek to understand and empathize with the other person's lived experience. So understanding that you yourself, as maybe a new person to being an ally, may slip up a little bit, and you feel like you shouldn't be held too harshly accountable. Think about the gender non-conforming person and how it may feel to be misgendered or even dead named. We need to be accountable. Take responsibility for your actions, privileges, and experiences that hold which could contribute to your biases. Don't dismiss what the person is sharing with you. Don't try to justify your behavior or defend your intentions. You hear yourself make a mistake, you listen to what the person says if they correct you, and then you be accountable. It isn't helpful to the people who have been hurt, and it shifts the focus away from the people who have been harmed and onto your personal feelings of guilt and shame and defensiveness. Remember, when you make a mistake, we want to center the person who we mistake and make them feel validated. So try to get yourself out of the center and put them in it. And then remember, intention is not impact as much as we would love it to be. The best part of an apology is one that doesn't make excuses or invalidate the other person's feelings. And then the last thing, and probably the most important part, is to commit to do better. We can treat this as a learning and a growing experience. The most authentic apology is meaningless if there's no change or if the behavior is repeated consistently in the future. So show that you can care by doing better next time. And then if you see somebody else misgender or dead name your friend or your individual, politely correct them and move on, and do not make a big situation about it. That really, I think, is another way to show that you are committed to doing better and that you are committed to affirming and understanding and showing support to the people that you care and love about. So that is the end of my tips and tricks. Next slide, thank you. I would like to plug in this right here. If you're interested in our advocacy work, we do advocacy across all 50 states. To fight conversion therapy, to implement suicide prevention policies in schools, to ensure that data sets are having sexual orientation and gender identity variables. And we are going to be coming out with a lot more coming out soon. And if you would like to be part of that work, please text Trevor to 40649. And thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate being here. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. I won't say nice to see you because I can't see you, but we're going to spend the next half hour, 45 minutes talking about still suicide awareness and some strategies that you can do on your own as far as helping LGBTQ youth in your care. Next. So just a little fun before we begin. In your chat box, if you'd be so kind to let me know to write the letter of what does the new pride flag was redesigned for what? A, to be more colorful and fun. B, to represent more diversity and include transgender and Black, Indigenous, and people of color. Added the pink color to represent lesbian, and to look more like a country flag. I see some thank yous for those of you who are I'm going to wait for more of you to put your B. Okay, I see B. Good. Yep. That's right. B is right. The new flag, the new pride flag is redesigned to represent more diversity and include transgender and Black, Indigenous, and people of color. So thank you everyone for participating in that. Great. I'm glad everybody knew that. Next. Let's see, have you ever heard the term SOGIE? S-O-G-I-E. So what does SOGIE stand for? A, sexual orientation, gender ideology, and expression. B, sexual orientation, geographic ideology, and epidemiology. C, sexual orientation, gender identity, and expression. D, sexual orientation, gender ideology, and expression. And E, I have no idea, which is completely okay if you have no idea. So I'm going to wait a few minutes, and it's like I said, it's completely okay to say I have no idea. This is a term that we are starting to use more and more, and that you will probably hear folks use around you. So I see many of you got it right. SOGIE stands for sexual orientation, gender identity, and expression. So the funny thing about that is that we all have a sexual orientation and gender identity and expression. All 7 billion of us on this planet. We have a sexual orientation, we have a gender identity and expression. So just food for thought. So the correct answer is C. All right, next. So this is a big slide, and it has a lot of statistics. So I realize that it's a lot of numbers. I know that this slide deck will be available for anybody to look at later on. And I'm gonna talk a little bit about some of the numbers we see here. Alex already shared quite a bit of statistics. I'm gonna spend a little bit of time talking a little bit about this, because this is why it matters so much. This is why it's so important that we talk about our LGBTQ kiddos. Nationwide, we know that 30% of children in adult home care identify as lesbian, gay, bisexual, or questioning or queer. So 30% is about 1 in 3, which when you're thinking about it, it's a huge number. So when I have folks in SDRTPs or folks in foster agencies or DCFS telling me, well, I don't have any kids who are LGBTQ, I say you probably do, you just don't know about it. But I can tell you that 1 in 3 of the kiddos you have on your caseloads are identify as LGBTQ. So there's a good chance you do. They just haven't come out to you. 57% of these kids are youth of color. So we're talking about, a layer of intersectional identities that we really have to take in consideration. 1 in 5 young people in the U.S. juvenile justice system identify as LGBTQ, and 85% of these kiddos are youth of color. So again, it's very important that we realize that this is not just one kid here, one kid there. We're talking about a very large amount of children. 12.9% of LGBTQ youth report being treated poorly in foster care system, compared to 5.8% of non-LGBTQ youth. I'm gonna go on and skip a few of these because you can read them on your own, but I want to mention that out of the 1.6 million homeless youth in the United States, close to 50% identify as LGBTQ. So you're thinking of the kids, no kid should be on the street tonight, but you're thinking of all the kiddos that are on the street, 50% identify as LGBTQ. And it's probably because they've been, kicked out of their house, so they don't feel comfortable in their home. When they were in foster care, they ran away because they were possibly being abused in group homes. So it's really important that we remember it's a huge number. And 30% of LGBT youth in foster care reported physical violence after they disclose their sexual orientation, gender identity, or expression. Again, SOGI. Alex shared a lot of statistics from this incredible Trevor Project's national survey on LGBTQ kids. It represented about 40,000 LGBTQ children across the United States. And I just pulled out a few numbers here that I really want us to remind and be mindful of. One is that nearly 16% of all LGBTQ respondents actually attempted suicide in the past year. So again, we're talking about attempting suicide, not just thinking about it, but attempting suicide. We also know that 40% of LGBTQ youth and more than 5% of transgender and non-binary youth report having seriously thought about suicide. So again, I really want to center about the fact that we're talking about life and death for these children. And so this is why it's so important that we talk about it. And again, I'm going to let you see these statistics on your own because I don't want to, bombard you. There's a couple more slides that talk about it. Next. So here's the good news. This doesn't have to be that way because we also know that transgender and non-binary youth who report having their pronouns respected by all or almost all people in their lives attempted suicide at half the rate of those who did not have their pronoun respected. So think about that. That's a pretty big number, right? So it's not that difficult to make sure that these kids are not going to want to try to kill themselves. Transgender and non-binary youth who have access to binders, shapewear, gender-affirming clothing reported lower rates of attempting suicide in the past year compared to transgender and non-binary with that access to this, 14% compared to 26%. Again, it's not that difficult for us to make sure that these kids don't attempt suicide. We have easy ways that we can work towards that, and we'll talk about that a little bit later as well. Teens who perceived parental support or caregiver support regarding gender identity were 93% less likely to attempt suicide. So again, I really won't let that number sit with you folks so that you understand how grave the situation is and how easy it would be to not have this happen. And finally, 70% of transgender youth with family support report having a positive mental health. Next. So here's a video that we're going to play for you. This is from our folks at TLC group home at CRTP, in California, and they have a fantastic project called Project Flare. Just bear with us as it starts. I see what's the name of the group home at CRTP that has Project Flare, TLC, Family and Children's Services, in Sonoma, I believe. If we can't play it, that's okay. We can put the link in the chat box, and you can. Oh, here we go. Thank you for your patience, folks.
Identify as a trans male. I identify as pansexual. I identify as gender fluid, and I use they them pronouns.
I identify as bisexual. I identify as a transgender male, also gay, and foster youth.
I want to welcome you to TLC Child and Family Services. TLC spent the last 45 years working with foster families, foster youth, and foster children. And it's really been in the last 20 years that TLC's been evolving alongside the LGBTQI community. Today, we confidently work with youth through transitioning. We often are the accepting family, accepting in a way that not all biological families can stand up and be. Research shows, and we kind of know this intuitively, if we go through something hard and there's someone there alongside us, it's okay, we can get through it. It's when we go through something really hard, really difficult, and we're alone with it, that it can be traumatic in our brains. And so the reason I'm saying that as a psychologist is because in the room, we're undoing aloneness. Coming here today, we're undoing aloneness.
I kind of started to think about it when I was about 9 years old. And then when I was 11 is when I first came out to myself. Last year I was identifying as transgender, but then I started realizing I don't know if I'm quite there yet.
I was born as a female, but I've never really felt that way ever since I can remember, really.
How do you identify? That might have an answer, but it's also like a path.
Identity is something you have to discover yourself. Nobody can make it for you. You have to make it yourself.
It's not like I'm supposed to wear this label, gay or transgender or foster. It's more just, that's kind of in me, but it's not a whole me.
It makes me very unique. That's what I know.
The gay people, we have to come out and say we're gay, whereas, straight people don't have to come out and say they're straight or anything like that. It puts all the pressure. If someone else could ask us, not just assume the sort of the normal.
A lot of foster homes just won't accept LGBT youth. They never know, is this family going to accept me? Are they going to be okay with me being transgender, gender fluid?
I was like, okay, well then, where is my home? Where do I belong?
I mean, I think it's just really important to understand how brutally some of these kids have been treated when they started to try and express themselves when they were younger, and how much that stays.
It's been hard not to compare myself to other people.
I was depressed, I was lonely, I was hopeless, I felt like nothing. To me, it's amazing.
It's felt like a safe haven for me. After so many years of hiding and being cautious, I finally get to actually express who I want to be. It feels like I'm at home, I'm free to be who I want to be. Today has been really meaningful to me, that just having our voices heard and not hiding.
Today was first time in years where I felt like I was a part of something and I belonged to something, and every single one of us maybe felt alone. But it's important to realize that there are people out there to kind of hold your hand and tell them that they got your back.
Oh man, when they're allowed to be who they are, it's just a different world for them.
Some of the most powerful experiences I've had here at TLC is really watching people standing up taller, like their hearts opening up to feel like they actually have a voice and someone's there to listen and care for them.
For our kids anyway, they've really thrived. They're doing really well.
My flair would be find your people. Find your people.
There's always going to be people that will understand you and will feel like home eventually. Like, you'll find your place.
There is a world out there where you can be queer and you can have fun and you can meet amazing people and you can have this wonderful full life, and it is out there for you too. There are people in your community who are like you. So don't give up. You're not alone, and your people are out there.
You will get through this. It won't last forever. You don't have to hide. You don't have to suffer.
Remember that no matter what, you're not alone. You're not.
There's always someone out there who does care about you.
Thank you, Alicia. So what did you observe in the chat box? Tell me how you're feeling. What did you see? What do you think? What went through your mind as you were watching the video? What did you see? How were the children? What were you thinking when you were watching? I know it was a little choppy, but I was able to hear most of it. So anybody? Wow. Could we have 10,000 of them? I love that. Proud to be part of a TLC organization. Yay. Helplessness and confusion. Yes. I saw the youth thriving. Yes. The teens felt relieved to be themselves. Yes, they did. There was a lot of rawness. Being affirmed in who you are is so important. Yes, it is. How alone most of them felt while trying to come out. Absolutely. I love seeing the relieved expression on the face of those who described what acceptance felt like. Hopeful to know that there are resources out there and how important it is to feel safe and understood and accepted. Thank you. Yes. Acceptance is key to experience humanity and wholeness. Find your people. Yes. Yes. Those were very powerful, beautiful youth. Yes. Thank you. Thank you for putting these in the chat. Next. It was wonderful. And yes, they felt comfortable with speaking. Absolutely. Yes. So a tad bit more, this is my last, I think this is my last one of stats. I just want you all again to be to remember that LGBTQ youth are twice as likely to report being treated poorly as their non-LGBTQ peers. They report verbal harassment at 100%. They are constantly being removed or they run away from placement because they're not being accepted. You've heard the young folks talk about that. They have a greater average number of placements than their non-LGBTQ peers because when a family finds out, maybe they don't want to keep the child in their home anymore, or they're not comfortable living in an STRTP anymore because they are out and people are going to start treating them differently. I often come across kids who are telling me that they're segregated, which means that they're being placed separately than their peers, or they're not allowed to have roommates because they're trans or they're non-binary or they're gay, and so they're being treated very differently than their straight and cisgender peers, and that's just not okay. Segregation has never worked and it still doesn't work. So we will be answering some of your questions later on if you have questions regarding that. They also are often punished because of their sexual orientation or their gender identity. I have many STRTPs who say to me, well, you know, if I place a trans kid or a non-binary or a gay kid with another kid, I'm worried about sexual activities. And, you know, there's a few things that I want to say about that. Is one, that if you're worrying about sexual activities, then you're worrying about your staff not making sure that the children are not having sex with each other. Children should never have sex with each other in a group home to begin with. So it's a problem of supervision. It's not a problem of sexual orientation or gender identity. So I really want you all to think about that. The other thing is, you know, if whether these are boys, girls, non-binaries, both gender at the same time, sexual activity has nothing to do with that either. So we can talk a little bit more about that later on, and we can answer some question about that. Next. All right, so let's talk a little bit about some strategies that we can all do to think about how to best affirm our LGBTQ and gender expensive youth in care. And gender expensive, you probably used the term before as gender nonconforming. I don't like using nonconforming because it sounds like somebody should conform to what society tells them to do. So I use gender expensive. So gender expensive is gender fluid. You might hear some kids say they're gender queer. I would never call somebody queer unless they tell you that that's how they identify, by the way. For some of us who are a little bit older, quite a bit older, queer was not a good word for us. But our young folks have reclaimed it, and it's a wonderful how they can identify with it. So, but you always want to listen to how they identify themselves before you call anybody or you assume that anyone is anything. I love what's happening in the chat. Please continue sharing your thoughts. That's wonderful. Next. So a few things to consider. The first thing is that the increased risk that LGBTQ and gender expensive GE youth are experiencing, they're not inherent. They're not because of they're not depressed and don't have anxiety because of being LGBTQ. They have these depression, these anxiety, and they're feeling the way they are because of the stresses of prejudice, discrimination, rejection, and mistreatment that they've received wherever they have been. So it's really important to not associate LGBTQ with problematic kids. It's really important to realize that they've experienced a huge amount of trauma before you've probably met them. LGBTQ children, LGBTQ plus children can thrive and succeed with their families, schools, and community support, just like any other child. Efforts to change a person's sexual orientation, gender identity are ineffective, they are necessary, and they're extremely dangerous. That's what a lot lead to suicide attempts. Another thing to realize is a person's or a child's SOGI, sexual orientation, gender identity, and expression, is not linear. It may change over time. And this is not because they don't know who they are or they're confused or they're going through a phase. It's just that gender identity and sexual orientation in general lives on a spectrum. So some folks may find themselves more attracted to a certain person during a certain times of their life, and it may change. And we are discovering in research now that more and more our gender identities and our sexual orientation, again, like I said earlier, are more on the spectrums. There have been a multitude of cultures who actually have fourth, fifth, and sixth gender, or sometimes they see the male and female gender in one. And so it's important to realize that it's our Western world who has actually moved this to being either linear, to being either binary. So it's either girl or boy, female or male, gay or straight. And right now we're realizing that actually all this lives on a spectrum, and we cannot, we don't have to be fixed in our SOGI. The other thing is, it's very important that we realize the kids that we're working with, they cannot be understood separately from their race, ethnicity, class, immigration status, ability, and all of these intersectional identities come together and come as a child who's in front of you as a whole. And we have to think about the mix of disadvantage and privilege that impacts their experience. And then finally, regardless of anyone's personal belief, we are required to treat LGBTQ and gender expensive young people equitably and respectfully in California, thankfully. And I always talk about the do no harm principle. So when I have a room in front of me, post-COVID or pre-COVID, I ask people, anybody in this room woke up this morning, please, a show of hand, anybody woke up this morning deciding that today they're going to hurt a child? So I look at the room, and of course, nobody ever gets their hands up. And so I say, well, now that I've told you that if you don't respect a child's pronoun or a child's name or a child's identity, they might attempt suicide. So what I want to say is that
regardless of your beliefs, I'm not here to change anyone's belief, and I wouldn't want anybody to change mine, but regardless of anyone's belief, if you are in this field, you're here not to hurt children. It's the do no harm principle. So now you know that by not respecting someone's pronouns or names or who they are or asking about their identity, you're actually causing harm. So next time, or if you see someone doing that, you may want to remind them what they are in this field for, which is to help and make sure that our kids will thrive. Next. So first thing, do not make assumption. Alex talked a little bit earlier. You know, you see two people who look like men who are holding hands, and you automatically assume they're gay men. And like I said, more and more research have shown that we're living on a spectrum. So don't assume this might be a trans person. It might be agender. They might be, you know, there might be a lot of different identities that we don't know. Again, it's not just about being gay or straight or trans and straight, trans and cisgender. I apologize. Cisgender is when your sex assigned at birth align with your gender identity. So for example, sex assigned at birth for me was female and I identify as female, therefore I'm cisgender. If my sex assigned at birth was female, but I identified as male, I'd be transgender. So just a quick tip here. So to engage your youth around their SOGI, just be inquisitive. Ask questions like you would with any other kids. Any kid that would come to you, you'd be asking questions. How are you? Who are you? Well, maybe not that way, but how old are you? What has your experience been like? What do you like? What do you not like? So you want to do the same thing with any kids. And you don't want to assume who they are. So the easiest thing to do is to introduce yourself with your own pronoun. Hi, my name is Vida Kavar. My pronouns are she and her. Now, it might be a little awkward at first, but the more you practice it, the more it's going to get easier and easier and easier. There are other ways to do this. You can also just get a little pin or a little pronoun pins or a little sticker with your pronoun on your tag or on your, I don't know, your laptop that you're walking around or your cell phone, on the back of your cell phone. And that indicates to the child or to someone that, hey, this person knows about pronouns. This must be a safe person for me to be out to, or to actually tell them, well, my pronouns are not what you think. So it's a very simple way to do this. And again, it takes practice, but once you do, you will do it more and more, and it'll get easier and easier. You can also, hey, what name would you like me to use when I refer to you? You know, like someone named Richard may want to be called, somebody calls Nicholas may want to be called Nick, or somebody Richard may want to call Dick, or whatever it might be. This is exactly the same principle. What name would you like me to use when I refer to you? And they will tell you what names they identify with, not necessarily the name that you see on their birth certificate or you see on their paperwork. It's really important to respect the name of folks that are coming and introducing themselves to you. Ask them what pronouns they use. And if a child says to you, well, why are you asking me? Obviously, I use he and they, or I'm a boy. You say, hey, no, I totally get it. I've just learned that I shouldn't assume someone's gender by just looking at someone. So that's why I always ask what pronouns people want me to use when I refer to them. That's an easy way. The kids are rarely going to give you a hard time with it. It's us as adults who are struggling with this. And so I really invite you and encourage you to practice with each other. And it'll get easier and easier. And by doing this, remember the do no harm principle. You're making it easier for a child to be out to you, to be comfortable around you, to feel affirmed. And then also, of course, you ask question, what else would you like me to know about you? Use gender neutral language. Don't ask if they're dating a girl or a boy. Ask them if they're dating, if it's age appropriate, of course. Think about gender neutral questions in general. And again, this takes practice. I am not saying this is easy. For some of you who have never done it, it's going to take a little bit more practice. It took practice for me, and I still make mistakes. And like Alex said earlier, if you make a mistake, you just apologize and you move on. It's when you make the mistake again and again and again and again that I invite you to really look at what's going on inside of you. Maybe talk with your supervisor or a close friend or someone that you trust and say, hey, something's up with me because I'm not able to, I'm constantly misgendering the kids that I work with what do you think is going on with me? What kind of bias do I need to be looking into? How can I work on this with somebody? So otherwise, if you make a mistake, you just move on. I also have had children in particularly in STRTPs. I've heard staff saying that it's confusing for them because children will and STRTPs, I'm sorry, they're group homes, short-term residential placement is what we used to call group homes. Staff will say to me, our kid leave being want to be called a certain name and called by a certain pronoun, but they come back from school with a different pronoun and a different name. They must be confused. They have mental health issues. Are they having split personality disorder? And I'm here to tell you that that's not the case. Our young folks are just discovering themselves. People who are coming out as different gender or have different names, they're just experiencing what names might work best for them or what pronoun might work best for them. So it's important to respect that. And although it might take a little bit of effort, it is always okay to say, hey, what pronouns are you using right now, to make sure I don't want to misgender you? Or what name would you like me to call you right now that you came back from school? It is as easy as this. It is not that difficult, folks. But again, it takes a little bit of practice. So I encourage you to practice. Next. I'm not going to get too much into this. I just want you to know that there are different pronouns out there. You've heard of he, him, his. You've heard of she, her, hers, they, them, theirs, which is a pronoun now that is our young folks are very often using. These are young folks or adults actually who do not necessarily feel that they're male or female. Sometimes they feel they're both. Or they feel neither, and so they identify themselves as they, them, theirs. This is actually a singular pronouns you've used all the time, because if you see, hey, somebody lost their jacket outside, you automatically use the there because you don't know, right? So you don't know if it's a her or him. Hey, somebody lost their jacket. So you've been using this as a singular pronoun for a long time, and it's been used that way. And it's really important, even though you will make mistakes. It's okay to make mistakes, but it's also, like I said earlier, it's important that you practice. You use they, them, theirs. Like I said, I still make mistakes, and I've been doing this work for a long time. But when I do, I say, I'm sorry, I meant them, and I move on. And, that's it. So be open-minded about that. There are also other pronouns. I'm not going to go into that. But some of our young folks utilize ze, here, here's, herself. It's a little bit more unique for us if we have not been used to using these pronouns. All I'm asking is that you be open to it. You will not know all the letters that follow LGBTQ. You have intersex, asexual, two-spirit. There's so many letters. I'm not asking that you know all of them, but what I'm asking is that whenever a child or somebody identify as such, that you respect that. And if you don't know what it is, then when you go back to your office or home, Google it. Don't expect somebody to teach you what it might be. However, what you can say to a child when they tell you, oh, I'm bigender, or I am asexual, or however they introduce themselves, you may want to ask them, would you mind telling me what that means to you? Because sometimes their understanding of certain terms might be a little bit different than maybe what you understand. So it's always a good idea to say, do you mind me asking what that means to you? It's not that they need to teach you about it, but at least they can tell you what that means to them. Asexual are part of the LGBT community. Yes, absolutely. Asexuals are part of the LGBTQ community. Yes. Next. All right, we have Micah. It's going to take a little time to load up, just like the other video. So yes, so I'm going to see some of the question that I see here. Do you think adults struggle because of their own biases? Great question. Yes, absolutely, I do. And Alicia, please feel free to play this, and as soon as it starts playing, I'll stop talking. Yes, we struggle with this because of our own bias. We struggle with this because, for me, for example, I'm 52, 52 years old, and I was raised in a very binary world, girls and boys, gay and straight. It's not until later in my life that I learned about, more genders, more sexual orientation. And so I have learn about different pronouns, and I challenge myself because I want to make sure the people I work with feel comfortable. I'm going to wait for the ads to skip. So yes, so it's our bias. Okay, I'm going to stop talking.
Hi, my name is Micah. I am 15, and I'm here to answer some questions about being non-binary. So for me, being non-binary is really just like figuring out what identity fit me best. I realized that I wasn't really a guy or a girl. I didn't fit the gender binary, and being this way just feels better to me. I use gender-neutral pronouns, they and them, and I use gender-neutral language to describe myself. So the most commonly used gender-neutral pronouns are they and them. They are gender-neutral, which means they don't really have either male or female labels attached to them. They and them have actually been used as singular pronouns since around the 14th century. You probably use it as a singular pronoun all the time without recognizing it. Like if there's someone across the parking lot, you can use to say like, hey, I think they double parked. There are some pretty funny alternatives, like they'd use in gentle thems, which I quite like. But you can also just say everyone or folks or y'all. A really nice alternative actually that I heard was date mate instead of boyfriend or girlfriend. When I first came out, my brother immediately started calling me his sibling. Figuring out that I was non-binary is one of the hardest things for me, at least to put into words. I do remember just thinking that there is something wrong with me, that I am the weird kid for wanting to hang out with like only the guys or only the girls when they shouldn't be. But it's different now. It's correct in a way that is weird and new, and I can find other people who feel what I'm feeling, and I can talk to them and I can make friends. For me, finding this particular label has been pretty amazing. You're on mute, Rita.
Oh, so sorry about that. So thank you for letting me know. What do you all think about this video? What do you all think about Micah? Any thoughts came to you when you were watching it? Any thoughts that you'd like to share in the chat box? I'm a little pressed for time, so I'll wait another couple of seconds. A recording of this training along with, yes, we will have all that available to you all. I honestly can't tell if it's a girl or a boy. Right, because that's how they present themselves. So super mature for their age, yes. And so we have to kind of challenge ourselves now to not only think about girl and boys, right? Our young folks are freeing themselves of these labels. We have to let them be who they are. Micah doesn't identify as either boy or girl, and so it's important that and Micah may look more like a boy or a girl at some point in our mind, but it's important that we listen to their story and to what they want us to know about them. Great. Let's move on. You can continue putting stuff on and somebody said they privately to me, and did I misgender? See, we make mistakes, and if I misgender, I apologize, and I move forward. So thank you. If somebody corrected me, thank you for that. Let's talk about your home. Whether you're in an STRTP group home or you're a foster home, make sure that the kiddos know that they're safe when they come to your home. And the only way for them to know that is if you have some stickers or some sign, or it could be as simple as a rainbow flag or as a LGBTQ ally. You have the HRC equal sign. You can put a safe zone. How does your environment clearly reflect the welcoming of all children? How does an LGBTQ child know that they're safe without coming out to you? How do they know they're safe when when they come into your place. You can go on the internet and you can print anything. You can put LGBTQ signs, they'll come up. You can print them. You can stick one on your fridge or wherever you want, so that the kids know that they are safe when they're around you. The minute they enter, you will not understand how safe and relieved they will feel when they see a sign like this, when they don't necessarily have to be pressured in not knowing whether you're a safe person. Will you be affirming? Will you even accept them in your home? So this is very important, and it's such a simple thing to do. Next. How to be an ally. So the first thing, and we talked about earlier, is don't assume that because a child identifies LGBTQ, that all their issue comes from their sexual orientation, gender identity, or expression. You know, they may have way different issues that are coming up for them that may not be related to their SOGI. But by the same token, some things could be related to their SOGI, and you don't want to ignore that. You know, for example, what kind of trauma they went through because of who they are. You want to have conversation with children and youth about their SOGI and who they may feel safe coming out to. It is never okay to out a child. It is never okay to tell someone about a child's SOGI without the child's permission. This is a very long process that is different for everyone. And so you cannot force a child to come out. If they don't want to, it's totally okay. But if they want to come out, you want to support their decision. You want to help them prepare for the coming out process. They may or may not experience discrimination. I've had a lot of foster parents who have told me, well, I don't want them to experience discrimination. We had a kid who, a young person who was 16, and they really liked to wear high heel boots, and they were in a community that was Armenian, and the foster parents were really concerned that this young person was going to experience discrimination, and so they wouldn't allow them to wear their boots. And so we had to work with the foster parent and say, you can't tell the child not to be who they are, but you can prepare them for what they may encounter when they're out. So sure enough, we worked with the young person. They were fully aware of what they were doing, you know, and they were fully comfortable. And sure enough, they were at the bank and somebody turned around and gave them a very nasty comment. And you know what? This young person was able to respond. They were already prepared. They responded something back in Armenian, and they felt proud of who they were. So what I'm saying is you can't prevent them from experiencing discrimination outside, unfortunately, but what you can do is advocate for them, protect them as you can, and prepare them for the outside world. So if they want to come out, you want to really, really support them in that coming out process. You have to also separate your discomfort versus safety issues. So I was talking earlier about folks who don't want transgender young folks to room with other children. That is probably about your discomfort and your bias versus safety issues. You know, folks who don't want trans kids to use bathroom that best match their gender identity. Why? Why are you uncomfortable? Right? Again, it's about uncomfortable. It's not about safety for the other children. There has not been any instance of a transgender person that I'm aware of that, you know, and I've done a lot of research that assaulted any non-trans, cisgender, meaning non-trans person, okay? So we really have to be thinking about safety issues. Now, if it's a safety issue for the transgender youth, then we have this conversation with them and we allow them to use the bathroom that they choose that best match their identity. Does that mean we have to advocate for them? Yes, that's exactly what we have to do. Does that mean we have to ensure that they are safe? Yes, that's what we have to do. I have folks that say, well, what if we place a child who is transgender with a child who's not transgender and that child has issues with it? Well, my question to you is, if you place a child, an Asian American child, with a child who hates Asian Americans and comes and tells you that, what are you going to do? Are you going to punish the Asian American child? No, you're going to work with the child who is actually the oppressor. You separate that child away to protect the other child. So I want you to be thinking you don't punish the victim, right? You work with the person who is having difficulty. So let that sink for a minute. And if you have a question about that, we can talk about it at the end. Make sure that you facilitate LGBTQ kids and gender expansive children spending time with people who support them, who affirm them, who they have access to groups, communities, as well as people who affirm their SOGI. And make sure you have someone who can advocate for them during family team meeting or CFTs. It's really important that somebody's there for them who understand who they are and what they're going through. So again, you want to be sure that somebody's there to advocate for them. Next. Confidentiality. So to maintain privacy regarding sexual orientation, gender identity, and expression, unless the child permits the information to be disclosed. And you can read the rest, but this is actually the law in California in child welfare. SOGI, sexual orientation, gender identity, and expression, is just as confidential as mental health diagnosis. So no one has the right to disclose somebody's SOGI without their permission. It's not allowed. This includes roommates, peers, school staff, or other caregivers. And if you find yourself that you for some reason think that you're going to have to disclose someone's SOGI, you ask them the question. You may say, "Hey, thank you so much for trusting me and letting me know that you're gay. Is it okay for me to write that in my report? I want to let you know my supervisor is going to have access to this, and the judge may also have access to this, and your lawyer. So I want to make sure before I write my report that it's okay for me to write that down." And they may say, "No, it's not okay for you to write it. I don't feel safe." Then you don't. And I know that's kind of like surprising, but you do not divulge SOGI information without the child or the person knowing about it and giving you permission to do so. So you always want to ask the youth under which circumstance you can share their information. And then you also want to think about, is the information on a need to know basis, or are you really sharing this for safety risks? We often share that information without real reasons. So again, it's completely confidential information that does not need to be shared. And then you also want to come up with safety plans with the youth around sharing their information. What happens if somebody reacts this way? What happens if your teacher says this? Will you come to me? Will you let me know so I can come to your school and advocate for you? This is not okay. Or, just work with your youth and ask questions from the children. They'll tell you how comfortable they are with you, and they'll tell you how comfortable they are with you, with them sharing their own SOGI information. So you always want to ask before you assume that it's okay to share that information. It never is without their permission. Next. Again, another law. Minors and non-minor dependent in foster care have the right to receive medical, dental, vision, and mental health services according to their gender identity. What does that mean? What it means is they have the right to receive mental health and healthcare from providers who have expertise and experience working with LGBTQ youth. So we want to make sure that when a young person is LGBTQ or gender expensive, that the medical professionals that they're going to go see actually have experience working with LGBTQ kids. And there is an incredible California Department of Social Services resource guide for transgender medical health in California. Hopefully somebody can put the link here on the chat. This is a resource guide that gives you the complete listing of all throughout California of medical providers that have actually been vetted already and given appropriate medical and mental health care for transgender and non-binary youth. And it also, in that resource guide, it also gives you a series of questions that you can ask medical providers to find out whether they're competent in giving services to LGBTQ youth. So it's really, really important that the medical doctors and nurses and whoever works with your kids understand what their needs are. Now, you may have your own thoughts about puberty blockers, hormone blockers, whatever it is, but we have to understand that this is not up to us to make those medical decisions. If your child came to you and needed insulin because of diabetes, you would not question a doctor. You would take, you would let them see the doctor, and whatever prescription comes out, you would support that. It's the same with transgender and non-binary youth. So it's really important that they have the right, that you understand they have the right to see a medical provider that actually affirms who they are and has experience working with children who are just like them. So you really want to advocate for these kids to see these medical providers. And it's really also very important, those of you who have clinicians in your organization, that these clinicians be trained in working with LGBTQ youth, not just transgender and non-binary youth, but also gay, lesbian, agender, transgender, all of the LGBTQ spectrum. Because if you're not trained, you don't know what to ask, you don't know how to you don't know how to affirm the child in a way that the child needs to be affirmed. It takes learning, it takes practice, and there's a lot of different places that your clinician can go get trained so that they can provide a proper practice. So it's really important. Again, it's the law, but beyond being the law, it's also important because we want it for the safety of our children. Next. So we're going to end very soon so we can go for questions. But in California, youth have the right to identify and live as their true gender identity and be recognized as such. This includes being placed, I'm sorry for using that name, according to their gender identity. So when a child comes to you, whether it's a foster agency or an STRTP or group home, and we need to ask them where they want to be, who they want to room with, and where they want to be placed. It's not okay for us to assume, if they tell us that they're trans, it's not for us to assume right away that they look masculine, so they're going to want to be placed with the boys. Not necessarily. We have to have those conversations with our young people. We have to ask them what they're comfortable with and where they want to be placed. And when they tell you, we have to support and affirm their desire and their choice. Their choice not in gender identity, their choice in being roomed with certain the gender that best align with who they are. Next. I'm not going to read this, so don't worry. I just want to let you all know that the Foster Youth Bill of Rights, the new version, just came out at the beginning of 2020. It's taken time to be disseminated, actually. But I want to let you know that there are several categories that directly address sexual orientation, gender identity, and expression. And it's really, really important that we see these because it's the law in California. If you don't, as a foster home, as an STRTP or a group home, or as a provider, be a lawyer, a social worker, an advocate, a CASA worker. You, as you see here, you have to receive instruction on cultural competency and sensitivity relating to sexual orientation, gender identity, and expression of your clients. You have to know about best practice. You have to make sure that you're placing in out-of-home care children according to their gender identity, regardless of the sex listed in their court or birth certificate. You have to make sure that kids have participated in extracurricular, cultural, racial, ethnic, personal enrichment, and social activity, including according to their gender identity, sexual orientation, and expression, that they get to interact with peers that are just like them. They get to have people around them that are affirming of who they are. So you can read that on your own time. Next. These are just some resources. We're going to go to the Q&A. This is just very few of resources, but let's see, Q&A. Great. Link to the list of gender affirming providers in California has just been put in the chat box. It also includes all types of questions that you can ask providers to see if they are experienced and safe for young folks to be seen by them. So let's go into our Q&A, into our questions.
I see one, Vita.
Yep.
Someone asked, do you have resources for young gender-bending youth dealing with teasing at school, like kindergarten age?
Kindergarten, wow. There is a lot of resources out there, but I think there's actually resources that you can Google. If Alex has some particular ones, I would welcome for you, Alex, to come up and share them. I think what's really important in that is to talk with the school and the teachers, right? It's for them to understand how dangerous it is for a young child to start experiencing trauma and oppression around their gender identity and or expression. So gender identity can come up as early as 3 or 4. So I'm not surprised that you're asking that question. I think that teachers and deans and all of these folks, directors need to be taking trainings on this. And there's a really easy way to welcome kids, whether it's at school, group homes, foster care, is when you have a new child that comes, or parents who come to you to get your new child into your school, is to say to them that you're an all affirming school, an all affirming foster home, or an all affirming STRTP. And what that means here is that we have children of all gender. That means for young ones, the gender is not necessarily the gender that's listed on their birth certificate. We want you to know that we have transgender children here. Obviously, in that young, you can't talk about sexual orientation. But in older, in group homes and in foster home, you welcome children by saying, we are all affirming of gender and sexual orientation here. And so I want you to know that we have children who identify as gay, straight, trans, agender, asexual, intersex, and we want you to know that this is the way we run our group homes or our foster home, and we need to know if you're comfortable with this. So you want to really tease out in the school the parents that will not be comfortable with that, because they're going to have to deal with it. And so these conversations need to happen. I saw, it was something on Facebook, there was a friend of mine shared with me, this father who it was a thank you dude at the park, and it said he has a gender nonconforming child who sex assigned at birth was male, but who likes to wear dresses, and he was kind of scared of taking the child to outside to the park with the other children. And so he does that, and there's other children, and one of the child gets up and goes to their father and says, Dad, this boy's wearing a dress. I don't want to play with a boy wearing a dress. And the dad answers to his daughter, says, well, you're wearing pants, aren't you? And the daughter's like, huh, we're talking little kids. And the daughter goes back and starts playing. And so this father wrote this thank you to the dude at the park who actually affirmed my boy by teaching his daughter that it's okay for boys to wear a dress. I just sharing that because I thought it was very cute and very sweet. So it's important that we start having these conversations with each other, with different teachers. It's really important to advocate.
Thank you, Vita. And Charlie just posted in the chat that there is a group in Sacramento of families who gather with gender variant, gender non-conforming, gender questioning, transgender children. So if anyone's in Sacramento, maybe look at Charlie's message.
That's
and
fantastic.
In relation to that, there's somebody else also asked, my kid might be accepted at home, but he's really missed out on building community during COVID. I need to make that a reality.
Yes, it is. It's very difficult. Actually, COVID-19 has really hit everybody so hard. But, LGBTQ kids in particular, because they feel so isolated to begin with. So now they don't even get to go to school where perhaps they have peers or people who affirm them. So it's been very difficult. Or we have some trans kids who have started hormone or puberty blockers, and because of COVID-19 had to stop. It's just been very traumatic. If Alicia, if you can go back to the slide before this, you will see that some of the some of the resource that here we go. Gender Spectrum, actually, genderspectrum.org offers a lot of peer groups online and also on chats and on cell phones. There's tons of different medias, and those are safe groups. I believe that Trevor Projects does that as well. I'm not certain, so Alex, if you want to chime in, feel free. There are a lot of, but Gender Spectrum is one, and then there's also PFLAG, of course, that's for parents. So they provide peer groups. Alex, go ahead.
No, I was just making myself available for questions. Go ahead, continue, Vita.
Okay, so so there's a lot of groups that are now online. I know that Santa Clara County offers a lot of groups online for young people and for their parents, and for LGBTQ foster parents as well. So there's a lot of groups now online that you can research and find easily, and it's very important to do that.
Thanks, Vita.
Thank you.
And next we had somebody who asked about preteens and teens who are wanting to undergo physical transformation like hormone therapy. They're wondering how someone that young you know, they're still discovering themselves. It's an adult decision. They're wondering if a person that young should be having access to this type of therapy.
Right. So that's a very common question. So there's a few ways to answer this question. And Alex, please chime in. Don't hesitate interrupting me. I'm okay with that because otherwise I talk too much. So a few things. It's not for us to make that decision. Children don't just from one day to the next starts using puberty blockers. They have to actually go to a doctor, a gender clinic, or a pediatrician who is used to you work with endocrinology, and they assess the child for gender dysphoria. So what gender dysphoria is, the anxiety and the stress and the depression that can be created for a child who is not living in the body that they think they should be living in. So for a child, for example, whose sex assigned at birth was female, but they feel very intrinsically that they're male, and they start growing breasts, for example. I've had kids, believe it or not, who have tried to cut their breast off. That is how serious this can be. So if instead we can offer them puberty blockers, who, by the way, are 100% reversible, right? So the minute they stop taking those puberty blockers, they can reverse and start their puberty normally. But puberty blockers just helps them, give them the time to decide, hey, I want a little bit more time to decide where I'm at in my life. But if you don't do that, and again, this is not a decision I could make. I'm a marriage and family therapist. I would actually have a doctor meet with this child and make those kind of decisions and prescribe the puberty blockers. But think about if the child then starts having puberty, and it causes them so much distress that they start having anxiety and wanting to kill themselves. Which one is more important, right? So I would rather have a child and put them on puberty blocker for a few years or however long this doctor and the child and the parents decide, than have a child that wants to cut their breast or attempt suicide. And I've actually had a child want to cut their genitalia because they felt very much that the penis didn't belong to them, and they were not given, nobody was listening to them, or so this is how serious, like how serious we're talking about. It's a great question. It comes very, very often. But what I would say is that you let a doctor, somebody who knows that, talk with the child about this kind of decisions. And those are not made overnight. Usually there's a therapist involved, a psychologist, there's usually, well, obviously an endocrinologist. Go ahead, Alex.
No, yes, and just wanted to really reflect on that right there, Vita, that like there is a team of medical professionals behind these decisions. So it isn't just a teenager coming forward and saying, I do not identify as what is assigned to me at birth. I want to undergo these types of therapies. That decision to undergo these therapies, to undergo hormone replacement therapy, and mind you, most states do not allow any form of like physical transitions below under the age of 18, and most doctors would not recommend it at this point. That is where the research is at as well. So we don't have to really worry about such horrible surgeries. We want to take this from the idea of a harm reduction perspective, and I think that's exactly what Vita was trying to get at. The idea of, do we want to prolong this experience on this child that can easily result in a suicidal or a crisis moment? And we have data, the Trevor Project has data that shows that transgender and gender nonconforming youth who do not receive the proper health care are at a higher risk of attempting suicide, which is what Vita was also trying to allude to as well. So it's taking that idea and pairing that up against, or do we let them experience this massive gender dysphoria by themselves and feel like they have no support? And really the harm reduction idea of it, the harm reduction practice, is to allow them to see the doctors, to talk to, if anything, just to talk through their gender dysphoria and to talk about what the implications are. So that way full medically backed, scientifically backed, data backed decisions can be made for the livelihood of people that we care about.
Thank you, Alex. And I know we're on time. We're time. I just want to say one thing, Summer. I see some of the question. It has to be court ordered in California unless you get the parents to sign on it. Otherwise, you can go to court. And as far as risk of being forced to out a youth in order to receive medical care, yes, it's a very gray area. I would have conversation with the youth about what that means, and you know, in order for them to get the proper medical care that they deserve. Yes, it's a very gray area. We could talk about this for another 2 hours.
Yeah. Hey, it's AJ. I wanted to say one thing about Courtney, just to add, you know, what we can see is like, depending on how the courts handle things, if you have someone that's also not educated as a judge and hasn't done that work, they can make orders that are not legal, that are not, you know, in alignment. And I worked with the youth where we really struggled in a smaller county to educate the judge. Eventually, there was some movement, but still not quite there, right? And then on the flip side, that particular youth ended up switching and changing their mind, and they're allowed to do that. And so it's like you can do all this work to try and, you know, get rights and get medical treatment and get hormones for a youth, and then the next day it's like, you know what? Now I identify as she, so I changed my mind. And it's just there's so much in this topic. There's so much to learn. So I just love that you all put this on. There's things that I've learned about today I didn't know about gentle then. So thanks for that. And
I would like to thank everyone very much for joining us today. Unfortunately, we are out of time. Please make sure that you write down some of the information that's in the chat. All of these slides will be sent to everyone who attended today, as well as the recording of the webinar, and it will be made available to those who are unable to attend. I would like to thank Vida Kavar and also Alex Gomez, our speakers for today. Thank you so much for joining us and for sharing all of this wonderful information. There will not be a webinar in the month of October, so we will see you all again in November. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, everyone.